My name is Gene Foltz, NRCS, and I'm going to take you through 3 time periods of macroplot history. The 3 points lets me talk truly about rangeland trend according to the 2018 report of the National Grazingland NRI field study. 1803 was actually the beginning of macroplot studies to answer the questions of what is out there and what is the conclusion. There's only 2 macroplots at the time. Of course, they were a little large, the Western Mississippi watershed and the Columbia River watershed. Jefferson's instructions are very similar to what the NRI collects on macroplots today. The soil, the vegetable production, and he says those not of the U.S., but remember that the U.S. ended at the Mississippi River at the time. The phrase about those not of the U.S. was not invasive plants. However, the 2018 report has a section on invasive plants. The NRI Grazingland data is collected on private land with the support and permission for entry from those private landowners. Jefferson's questions about the remains and accounts of extinct animals was kind of laying claim and excluding future claims based on ownership and the conditions of sale at the time. Same thing occurs today on ownership with the condition whenever you're buying private property. The NRI on-site study uses scientific tools slightly more advanced than the thermometer and is on track to getting answers back to President Jefferson. The GLO, General Land Office, is the second point for macroplots. The macroplots got a little bit smaller. The GLO field work in the 1880s marked down many details of a section of land being transferred from government to private settlement. In Oregon, an ice house, river transportation, and forest resources are documented through the GLO drawings. In Florida, the GLO map work preserved the location and expanse of historic plant communities such as the dry prairie. In the meantime, several efforts were applied to measure what is out there and find conclusions, which brings us up to 1994 when the National Research Council shared a new way of looking at rangelands. Agencies put their heads together and produced common protocols to measure rangelands. So that brings us up to the 3rd time point of 1999. What does it take to get a nationwide study cranked up on non-federal grazing lands? The range profession knew what to look at and knew how to measure it. But remember, long-term monitoring studies cannot be changed over time. So just like cranking up a Model T, you have to get it right the first time. The macroplot was reduced to a mere 4/10 of an acre with 2 transects. So the 2018 report, you can search for it under Results plus NRI, summarizes its results in maps, tables, and narratives based on the ecoregions, individual states, and 5 broad regions. As you can see, the Intermountain West and the Great Plains regions are pretty close to mirroring the first 2 macroplots in Lewis and Clark's watershed expedition. And I can report that the trend is up on the amount of information gathered at the macroplot, while the size of the macroplot has trended downward. So the NRI results presented here address current conditions and changing condition based on data collected on approximately 10,000 rangeland macroplots during each of 2 time periods, 2004 to 2010 and 2011 to 2015. The report summarizes the differences in the time periods by contrast. So in 2012, the NRI began recollecting selected macroplots. This repeat photo does show some of the change. The clouds on the left have been replaced by wind turbine towers on the right in 2012. The long-term study was designed to get reasonably close on repeat macroplots. The photo also documents how off-site ownership actions may impact macroplots.
Taking stuff.
So the map legend needs a little bit of explanation. The NRI study looks at lands with diverse management. If conditions change, then that reflects the conditions on all non-federal land, regardless of association with NRCS. Okay, unmuted. So these heroic efforts are on the land manager. And we know that the land management practices have improved greatly over the past 50 years. And we certainly appreciate the private landowners allowing NRI to collect the data. Okay, the map on the left shows the GLO railroad land transfers that occurred back in the 1870s. The NRI study map on the right shows these features of ownership along the railroad right-of-way through the states of Utah and Nevada. The federal lands have a light gray color. Dark gray means insufficient data. The report's website has single file high-resolution maps, which really lets you zoom in closely to your local area. The hot color scheme of more red means higher percentages of that condition on the map. EPA's ecoregion polygons have a known percentage of rangelands from the overall NRI, but the size of the colored area may misrepresent perceptions. So you want to look at the tables where the amounts are reported in 10,000 acre increments. One of the maps on cheatgrass shows the foliar cover. This is gathered from the line point intercept protocol. The second time period, change from light orange to dark orange in the Great Plains, indicates that more than 5% of rangeland acres has cheatgrass cover of at least 50%. Southern Oregon cheatgrass has also increased. So I think these changes make the hazard very clear. Maps indicating present depict the species captured in any of the 11 protocols of the macroplot. Between Oregon and Idaho's Interstate Highway 84 corridor shows conditions shifting toward a darker red. In Washington, conditions are improving. But the USDA plant's blue map up above shows that ventonata is reported throughout the West. The map legends change a little bit, but the color scheme stays the same. Salt cedar is known as a prolific problem on riparian areas. Spatially, the linear riparian systems are not adequately sampled by the NRI stratification. So it's best to be cautious about conclusions for linear systems. We just need more time and more macroplots to make that conclusion. So the macroplot is the evaluation area that NRI uses for interpreting indicators of rangeland health protocol. And a reference for past conditions is extremely useful for assessing departure. Here, bare ground is a single measure from the line point intercept protocol. That measured number is used to rate the range health indicator bare ground in the reference. And you can notice that bare ground is red shifting towards the east nationally in the second period. But bare ground is a natural characteristic of rangelands influenced by many things, including the functional groups that might be present. So when we look at the attribute rating for soil site stability, which bare ground is a part of, we see a different picture. At every macro plot, there's at least 9 technical things that are considered, measured, or observed to determine how well ecological functions are operating in totality for each of the 3 attributes. So when we compare measured bare ground and the range health attribute for the same area of concern for the same time series, we can now start to bring enough information together to make some conclusions as to where the problems are. So the percent of rangeland acres where all 3 rangeland health attributes were assessed as moderate, moderate to extreme, or extreme to total departure changed upwardly by more than 3% between the 2 time periods. 11 states, however, had decreases, some as high as 13% fewer acres with all 3 attributes of departure. So you can look at the tables and the states to get that information. As well as a separate look at each attribute shows that there's a general increase in departed conditions. The good news is that 77% of US non-federal rangelands are in relatively healthy conditions and has no significant soil, hydrologic, or biotic integrity problems. The NRI study is designed to improve knowledge at larger scales, but there's a lot of detail hiding at the macroplot scale. So we're now leaving the NRI report and statistical estimate and are going to the NRI download table with ESD information from single site macroplots. With this source of data, specific local answers can be found. On all macroplots, the apparent trend protocol is observed. Apparent trend is based on readily seen or evident physiognomy. In MLRA 23, the NRI has 138 ecological site files with macroplot data collected. I looked at 10 common ecological sites for a total of 454 macroplots. Some of you might recognize that number, 454, to produce the bar graph. The bar graph shows that 40% of the time we can still tell something is going on with the parent trend. It is a visual assessment protocol that can be compared to measured data or the macroplot photos. Plant census is a 15-minute search for additional plant species in the macroplot. The number of species were compared between the line point intercept and the plant census protocols. Plant census had 29% more species than the line point intercept. Forbs especially increased as a wide functional group. The species list helps focus plant identification training for health assessments and inventory. Macroplots can be used for comparative analysis, which may help inform ecological site keys. So good condition macroplots with similarity indexes representing a single state transition model plant community phase were compared. On average, the sandy site in MLRA 34 has slightly fewer plant bases than in MLRA 67. This can be confirmed in a more focused local assessment. The line point intercept protocol has good definitions and is the most repeatable and consistent method for data collection from Oregon to Florida. So in summary, the NRI on-site grazing land study strives to collect and distribute information locally and nationally to help answer both historical and new questions. Private landowners who allow us on their property should be applauded for their permissions to access their private property.